Good morning, or depending on when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokemon trading card game.
You're listening to PTCG Radio.
Now, as is becoming an uncomfortable theme, there aren't that many exciting things that have happened this week. Luckily for all of us, there are exciting things about to happen. This very weekend, is the first of 3 rounds of regionals in the United States. Now, I haven't looked into the exact figures because I'm not over there and it's somewhat inconvenient, but basically there are less regionals per day than there used to be. So that means that if you want to make sure you're going to all 3 sets of regionals, you are likely going to have to travel at some point. It also means that the attendances at each particular regionals are likely to go pretty gosh darn high. Now, attendances of regionals in the US, 200, certainly isn't out of order, and we could be seeing attendances much higher than that. If you bear in mind that attendances have been up in Battle Roads recently, we've been seeing Battle Roads not that uncommonly with over 100 people attending. Then you bring in a regionals, which is worth 120 points if you win, rather than 15 for a Battle Roads. That's not that far off a third of the way to an actual invite when you win. So this means that people are going to be keen, much keener than they were at Battle Roads. So I think we could be seeing some absolutely ridiculous attendances for regionals, which has got to be a good thing at the end of the day. You know, growth for the game, etc. has got to be a good thing. And it means there's going to be some very good, very interesting tournaments. What I will try and do for next week's podcast is find you the attendance for all of them. I will certainly get the winners. Now, I won't be able to do interviews because I'm not in the US, but what I will be able to do is find you as much information as there is on the internet, or that I can glean from certain sources, and tell you all about the winning decks, what they won, with how they won, etc. So all that's coming up next week. And after the news, we're going to have a little bit of a look at some of the things you need to think about for regionals. So the first piece of news we've got this week is that there are a couple new cards which have been revealed in Japan. These are cards which are given out to participants of Japan's Battle Carnival tournament. And there are 2 of them. There is a Landorus non-EX. It's got 110 HP. It's got a weakness to water, resistance to lightning. That's pretty standard. Pretty much the same as the other Landorus, if I remember correctly. Unfortunately, it's just not particularly good. It's got an attack called Extra Sensory, which for a fighting and a colourless does 20 damage. And it's called Extra Sensory, like the old Knockdowl that used to let you draw a card as well. And it means that if you've got the same number of cards in your hand as your opponent does, the attack does 30 more damage. Still, 50 for 2. I mean, for instance, Tracking EX. Now, I know it's an EX and it gives up 2 prizes, but it's also got a huge HP to make up for that. That automatically does 50 and goes through resistance for the same energy cost. So I don't like that very much at all. If you add just 1 more energy, the other Landorus can be doing 80, which, again, I just don't like it at all. And it's got Rock Tomb, which for 2 fighting and 2 colourless does 90 damage and stops your opponent retreating. Now, stopping your opponent retreating is very, very good. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later on when I talk about Switch in Darkrai decks. But basically, Stunfisk has been doing this season. It allows you to stop your opponent retreating, and it means that if they don't play Switch, or they can't find a Switch, and they can't attack, they are stuck there. Capture up a Pokemon and just stop it retreating while you kill it. And this will 2-hit KO an EX that doesn't have Eviolite on. So you can capture up an EX, and as long as it can't attack next turn and they can't draw a Switch, you've got 2 prizes. The problem is, this is just way too high an energy cost. Now, by the time we get this, we'll have Ether, which allows you to attach energy from your deck. And we're obviously still going to have double colourless energy, so I suppose you could get this going turn 2 with an energy and a DC and an Ether. But even so, getting 4 energy on a Pokemon that's only got 110 HP in this format, it's not great. Now, the weakness is pretty good, the resistance is very helpful. Unless people are playing Empoleon or Kyurem, you're going to be doing pretty well weakness-wise. And the lightning resistance is going to be good against electric decks. The problem is, most of them are now playing Rayquaza. And if they're playing Rayquaza, well, 2 energy and you're dead. I like the attack, but I think with 4 energy it's overpriced. I would rather play the other Landorus, which has an accelerating first attack and can hit 80 for free, along with 10 to both your bench and your opponents. I think that's a better attack, certainly for the cost of it. The other card, however, is considerably more interesting. This is called Plasma Badge, and it's a Pokemon tool card, and when you attach it to your Pokemon, they are then designated as a Team Plasma Pokemon, and this is incredibly interesting. Now, I've had a good look through the Plasma Gale cards that I talked about a couple of weeks back, and it doesn't actually do all that much. The big thing that it does is it makes any Pokemon compatible with Colress Machine. That's a trainer that allows you to attach a Plasma Energy from your deck to a Pokemon. And there's also Plasma Frigate, the Stadium card, which gives you no weakness while you've got a Plasma Energy attached, irregardless of whether you are a Team Plasma Pokemon or not. So in theory, you stick Plasma Badge onto one of your Pokemon, use Colress Machine, and you've got an extra energy attachment from the deck. None of this having to have it in your discard or it having to be on top of your deck or anything like that. It attaches from the deck. So potentially very, very good. Now my first thought with this card was Darkrai. You hit this and a Colress Machine turn 1, then you get your Plasma Energy on. You've got your attachment for the turn, then you can use either Ether or Dark Patch, and your chances of getting a turn 1 Darkrai dramatically increase. Not only that, but you stick Plasma Frigate down and you've got no weakness, Terrakion can't harm you. And then I realised that, well, all they need is a Tool Scrapper to get rid of Plasma Badge, or an Enhanced Hammer to get rid of the Plasma Energy, or another Stadium to get rid of Plasma Frigate. Any of those things, and they can one-hit you anyway. So actually, it's not that great for Darkrai, although it will add a little bit of speed to it. My inkling is that by this point, people are going to be playing more big basics, and it's not going to be the donkey machine that we would like. However, turn 1 Darkrai, always a bonus. Now, it does have 2 other things that I can see straight off the bat, 2 other advantages. One of these is that it can be discarded with the supporter card Grunt to allow you to draw 4 cards. Although if you really shouldn't be putting Pokemon cards into your deck just to allow you to discard it to use a supporter. For the one thing, you're going to have to draw it at the same time. For the second thing, there are better things you can put in your deck. The other interesting use I thought of was Snorlax. Now, Snorlax was the Pokemon I mentioned when I talked about Plasma Gale. It's one of my favourite Pokemon just as a Pokemon, but it's also one of my favourite cards in Plasma Gale. Now, it's got a ridiculously expensive attack for 5 energy, which does 30 damage times the amount of Plasma Pokemon you've got in play. Full bench plus an active Snorlax, assuming they're all Plasma Pokemon, does 180 damage, 1-hit KOs any EX Pokemon. Doesn't 1-hit KO Wailord, strangely, but he's not seeing a huge amount of play. So this has potential, because what you can do is you can have some non-EX Pokemon in your deck, maybe something like a Darkrai or, I don't know, a Kyurem if you wanted to take out things like Landorus, and all of a sudden you've still got that maximum 180 damage, even though you're using non-Plasma Pokemon. However, it's still a little bit clunky. You're still relying on drawing it at the right time, that it can still be tool scrappered off, etc. So, Plasma Badge is one of these cards which initially looks incredibly interesting, but actually turns out to be somewhat disappointing. Now, the other piece of news is also very interesting, and this news makes me question how cynical I'm feeling. This piece of news is that the rewards for attending your Pokemon League once a week are changing. It used to be that you play a few games, you get the promo cards, and then you play enough games, you get a little pin badge. It's different now. It's now, if you play enough games, you get a code card, and then if you play more games, you get a badge. And if you get these badges, you are also entitled to claim 1 badge case. So you get a lovely little display case to keep your badges in. And the badges are, I believe, the actual badges from Black and White 2, in the same way that the badges from this past season were the gym badges from the Black and White games. Now, here's where my cynicism potentially comes in. I don't know if this is a good thing or not. Now, personally, I quite liked the promos, but I'm not going to be too sad to see them go. They were kind of cool, and it was nice, and I kept a collection of them, and I've got all of them going back a couple of years now. But they were never stunning. Back a couple of seasons ago, they released things like Uxie and Broken Time Space, etc. And then, yes, we did have some very, very nice promos. But certainly last year, there were no fantastic cards released as promos. They gave us energy, but nobody really earned enough energy to actually use as a full deck. So you'd have to go trading around, and it was nice to have, don't get me wrong. But I don't particularly miss them. These have effectively been replaced by code cards. Now, I've started playing the online game a little bit. If you're wondering why you don't see me on there more often, it's purely because I don't have very good internet. And 50% of the games I've played, I've lost, and every single one of them has been because I've been timed out because my internet's too slow. So as soon as I get better internet, I am on there. So I like the idea of having code cards. As for the badges, we're basically getting the same thing, but we get this badge case instead. What is strange, though, is that these cases and badges are not being delivered to your local store. What's going to happen is you play the games, you get registered by your league leader, you go online and order these badges and case into the store. Now, I had a similar thing to this when I ordered my phone a couple of years back. You had to wait 2 or 3 months, and then you could send off, and you would get a check back to cash back some of the money. So it was a half-price line rental if you followed these very specific instructions. Now then, it was clearly designed to try and make sure that I didn't claim this money back. Now, obviously I did, but it's designed so that you forget or you miss one of the requirements and you're not entitled. Now, I don't think I can go so far as to say that Pokemon are deliberately doing it in this case. They seem to be making it as easy as possible for you to go and order these badges and cases into the store. But it does make me wonder why they don't just send them into the store. Maybe they're worried about making too many and losing money. Maybe they're worried about people getting more than one. And speaking of losing money, this does bring me back to something I chatted about briefly when I talked about Battle Road attendances going up. Code cards are clearly going to be cheaper to make than the foil promos. There is no doubt about that. Less materials, less complicated manufacturing process. It is going to be cheaper to make. The badges presumably will cost the same as they did last season, but they're paying more money to get the badge case. But then again, if a lot of people play and don't claim back these badges and cases, then they are actually going to be saving money based on what they spent last year. So potentially this could be seen to be Pokemon saving money by changing the prizes. Which then does also lead me to the question of, is this indicative of possible, I wouldn't say huge financial worries, but certainly financial inconsistencies? I mentioned before how in the UK we pay approximately £5 per Battle Road. In the US you don't, which means it costs Pokemon money to put these Battle Roads on rather than turning a little bit of a profit. Now, if you're budgeting for, say, 20 or 30 people turning up to a Battle Road, and instead you get 120, 130, surely that means that they're taking a financial hit on these Battle Roads. Again, I don't have any knowledge of this, but if you're not charging, you are losing money. That's got to happen. Now, if you've budgeted to lose money for 20 people turning up, and all of a sudden 30 people turn up, you're losing a bit of money. If 120 people turn up, it could be that Battle Roads have hit Pokemon, and this is one way they're trying to get some money back. Now, I could be miles off the mark here, but following the logic through, there is a chance that I'm right about this. If I ever get any kind of confirmation, and I'm afraid I don't know anyone high enough up to get confirmation, but if I ever hear anything else, I will of course let you know. So what I want to go on to talk about today is regionals. These are coming up, these are big. Now, you're looking at hundreds of people over there in the US. So any of you that listen to this, I inherently like you more than anybody who plays Pokemon that doesn't listen to this. So if you're listening to my podcast, I wish you a very sincere good luck for these regionals coming up. I hope you absolutely wipe the floor with anyone you play that doesn't listen to my podcast. If by some massive coincidence there's enough of you listening that you play each other, good luck to both of you. I hope it's a fair and enjoyable game. So in terms of regionals, I have one big tip. Consistency. It is huge in this format. We don't have the crutches that we've had in the past. Last season we had Sableye. Smeargle. Smeargle was absolutely stunning. You could use your supporter and an opponent's supporter in the same turn. Before that, before we had Skyro Bridge and people weren't playing Smeargle, we had Cleffer. It was a 30 HP basic, it was incredibly donkable, but at the end of the day, it gave you a free hand refresh of 6 cards, which is not to be sniffed at. Going back a little bit further, we had Uxie, a Pokemon you put on your bench, and it allowed you to draw up to 7 in your hand. And going back further still, we had Claydol, which allowed you to put cards into your deck and then draw until you were up to 6. An incredibly fantastic consistency crutch, and these were wonderful cards. We don't have anything like that anymore. So what we basically have is a format where you have to run a number of supporters and then sit there and cross your fingers, and games are decided according to who draws a supporter, because, and I would be amazed if there's anyone out there that hasn't been through this, we've all got experience of sitting there, drawing a crummy opening hand, not drawing a supporter, and getting absolutely trounced. And I'm willing to bet we've all also had experience of an incredibly uncomfortable game where we start quite nicely, our opponent draws no supporters, can't get rolling, and we roll over them in about 5 minutes. It happens both ways. There are, however, things that we can do. Now, keeping this format going, how many supporters do we run? Now, I cannot give you a catch-all figure for every single deck in the format, but what I'm going to say is 15, and that includes random receivers. So you may wish to run 4 Juniper, 4 N, 2 Bianca, 3 Bianca, sorry, and 4 random receiver, which would take you up to 15, or any other permutation thereof. Maybe you want 4 Juniper, 4 N, 4 Bianca, and only 3 random receiver, but I wouldn't, in this format, run less than 15. And I know a lot of people are. I was one of them. Last format, the general rule was 12 plus Smeargle. And that was the rule I went by, and I made some pretty consistent decks. I am not finding 13 to be a high enough number in this format. Firstly, you can't junk arm for random receiver anymore. Secondly, our Junipers are so much more brutal than they were before, because we don't have things like Professor Oak's new theory. Our supporters are worse, we don't have junk arm, we don't have Smeargle, we don't have Cleffer, etc. I would say 15 supporters as a minimum. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how to make a consistent deck here, and I'm going to use Darkrai as my example. Now, when you're making a deck, you've got cards that you have to run, which I'm going to call essential cards, and cards that are nice to run and can help you in some circumstances, for instance, optional cards. Essential cards will be things like Dark Patch that you've got to have to get your energy on, Ultra Ball to get Pokemon out, your supporters, things like Energy Switch, and I call that an essential card because I don't think Darkrai can run without it. If you're running things like Darkrai Hydreigon, you're going to need Rare Candy. Essential cards, you need to have as many as you can. If you're playing a Darkrai deck, really you need 4 Dark Patch, because you're running a Pokemon that's got 1 attack that needs 3 energy. You can't afford to only have 1 or 2 energy. You need to get those Darkrai's out as often as possible and as fast as possible. Dark Patch helps you do that. Similarly with Pokemon Search, in this case Ultra Ball, you're going to want to run 4. It gets energy in the discard and it gets your Pokemon out. There is no excuse for running any less than 4. Supporters, again, one of the things I'm seeing more and more often nowadays is people going, oh, I've got 13 supporters, I'd quite like a 4th catcher, let's take out a catcher for a supporter. Let's take out a supporter for a catcher. It's a terrible idea, because you're taking out a card that you need to get going and replacing it with a card which is nice and will help you in some circumstances. Other optional cards would be things like Eviolite or Dark Claw. These things are useful, but they are not the be-all and end-all. Any healing cards like Potion or Max Potion, Super Scoop Up, etc. Plus Power, even Pokemon Catcher, Tool Scrapper, Enhanced Hammer, Crushing Hammer, etc. Now you might say that your deck revolves around healing, etc., and that's all well and good. But if you can't get set up and attacking, that healing is going to be useless. I played a game at Nationals this past year, and in the worst draws I've ever had, I ended up with a hand at one point which included 4 Junk Arm, 2 Shaman, and absolutely nothing else. In that game, I used Max Potion 6 times. I attacked 0 times. I had loads of Max Potion, but there's absolutely nothing I could do. So, essential cards need to be run. If you're running a Stage 2 deck, you need to run 4 Rare Candy. Work on your essential cards, your consistency cards before the optional cards. Yes, Eviolite's really fantastic to run, but if you haven't got enough rare candy or enough supporters, Eviolites are nowhere near as important. Let's take Eviolite as an example here. I've been playing a Terrakion deck. I told you I played it at the last Battle Royals I went to, got third place in Nottingham with it. When I played Darkrai, generally they would have an Eviolite on them. But as I played 4+ power and a Tool Scrapper, and I played Catcher to get ones on the bench that didn't have Eviolites, I don't believe there was one time I was having to hit for 160. Generally, if you're playing against a deck that's going to one-hit you with Terrakion, they're going to go through Eviolite regardless. So, although Eviolite's brilliant in theory, a lot of the time it's going to be completely irrelevant. And so that's where things like Rare Candy come in. Put your 4th one in, don't cut it for an Eviolite. Let's think about attackers here. Again, it depends on the deck. If I'm running Darkrai Hammers, my attacker is Darkrai. I've got to have 4 Darkrai. I can't cut a Darkrai for a Crushing Hammer, I need 4 of them. But if I'm running something like Hydrangea Darkrai, or if I'm running Terrakion Darkrai, I don't need 4. I'm not going to be taking all my prizes. Say I'm running Darkrai Terrakion. I'm probably going to be running 2 Terrakion. So if I run 4 Darkrai as well, my opponent can take, off of those cards, not including any Sableye, they can take 10 prizes. Now 6 gets them the win. Also, I'm unlikely to be spending the entire game attacking with Darkrai, so I'm not going to need all 3 of them. I'm probably only actually going to use 2 of them. And if I use a third, it's going to be late game. So if one's prized, it's not a big deal. And then that brings me to energy counts. Now, generally in something like Terrakion Mewtwo, you'll see 9 fighting energy and 4 double colourless. And again, what people tend to want to do is cut down on energy cards because it gives them more space for cards that do tricks. Things like Eviolite or Crushing Hammer or Enhanced Hammer. But if you don't have energy, then pretty much you can't attack. It's not good enough to be running too little energy. I've been running around a little bit with Darkrai recently, playing things like Darkrai Hammers and Darkrai Terrakion, and 8 was the number of dark energy I was generally seeing as quoted, as long as you were playing something like 4 Prism or 4 DCE or 4 Fighting. I found 8 wasn't enough. I went from 8 till 9. I cut down a little bit. I think I must have had to cut a Crushing Hammer or something. And what I found was I was getting energy in a discard earlier. Now, obviously, there comes a limit. You don't want to be running 17 or 42 dark energy, but you need to make sure you've got enough there to get rolling. Now, the way I tend to test consistency is I do gold fishing. I draw some test hands, and I literally make the deck, and I shuffle it up, and I draw 7 cards. And I have a good look at those opening 7 cards, and then I usually play out the first couple of turns. Now, sometimes I'll be playing just against thin air, seeing how well I can get set up in 2 turns or 3 turns. Other times, I will be assuming that my opponent is playing a deck that runs really hot. So, say for instance I'm playing against an Eels deck, I might assume that by turn 3 they've got 2 Eels out and they're able to rotate Raikus around. So you can imagine the kind of things you're going to need to be doing at that point in the game. And luckily, it's never been easier. If you've got the cards, you can make it on the official online program. Even if you play against a person playing basic yellow, you still get to see what your opening hand in your first couple turns are going to be like. If you don't have the cards, you can go on playtcg.com, make up the deck, and then you can literally sit there, get one of your friends to log in and not actually play you, and then you can sit there and shuffle up a few opening hands. Or you can do it the old-fashioned way and just make the deck, put it in sleeves, and shuffle it up. And just draw yourself some test hands. If you can't get set up very, very quickly doing test hands, it's not going to happen in a real game. Now, in terms of how well your deck sets up, here's my rule. I don't play a deck unless it sets up consistently 2 games out of 3. Because when I'm in Top Cut, I don't need to win all 3 games, I need to win 2 out of 3. So if I can set up 2 out of 3, okay, I might be playing against an opponent who outplays me, and that's fine. It's a nice way to win at the end of the day. But if I can set up in 2 out of 3 games, I've got a good chance of winning. Similarly, say it's a 9-round Swiss, I'm going to be going about 6-3, which might be enough to get me into cut. But if I'm always setting up 2 games out of 3, then maybe I'll be winning one of those games where I don't set up as fast, but neither does my opponent, so I don't have to. And then I'm going to end up going something like 7-2, and I'm going to be ending up getting into cut. My rule is if your deck doesn't set up consistently by turn 2 or 3, 2/3 of the time, it's not worth playing. So the other thing I really need to talk about is what deck to play for regionals. Now, I kind of hinted at this last week, but I'm going to make it very, very blunt. There are 2 decks at the moment which have proven themselves to be significantly better than the rest of the field. Hydreigon Darkrai and Ray Eels. And I would expect most, if not all, of the regionals being played this weekend to be won by those 2 decks. Because at the end of the day, although they have bad matchups, they have more good matchups. And they're tending to be played by good players. And I would not be surprised in the least if they were the only 2 winning decks. In the same way that we saw in a bunch of regionals last year, I believe it was 6 Zebcrom Eels and 1 Durant in one session. It was crazy. So, here are the decks you should look out for. Darkrai Hydreigon. It's brilliant when it sets up, and it beats almost everything when it sets up. It can, however, stutter. It relies on a stage 2. You will find that people who play this and don't play consistent builds, 4 Ultra Ball, 4 Rare Candy, etc., they will not do as well, and they will be sitting down lower tables, and they'll be complaining that their deck hasn't set up and it went so well in practice. If you hear anyone saying this about Hydreigon Darkrai, and they're not playing 4 Rare Candy, 4 Ultra Ball, tell them it's their own fault. I'm sure they've got a lovely list of techs, but that is irrelevant when you can't set up. Even when you do set up, there are some decks that can one-hit KO your Hydreigon, or that can take out your Darkrai in one hit, etc. Even something like Garchomp Altaria is pretty good against this sometimes, because it can take out your Hydreigons quite easily and start wearing down your Darkrai's. So it's good, but if you're playing this, you need a very, very consistent list. Not only do you need a very consistent list, but you do need to be getting prepared for the mirror. That could be putting in techs like Giratina or Bouffalon. It could just be making the most consistent deck that always sets up, and that will take you through the mirror anyway. The other deck to be aware of is Ray Eels, that brilliant deck which combines Eels and Rayquaza, and there'll be other attackers, maybe Zekrom, maybe Raikou, etc. This again is a deck that if you can set up and be switching out Rayquaza, you're probably going to win, because every turn you're going to be hitting for 120, 180, and you're going to end up winning quite quickly. And if your opponent doesn't play something like the non-EX Rayquaza, or the EX Rayquaza themselves, they are going to lose pretty gosh darn quickly. Though it's not perfect, it can be quite slow. Your Tynamos are donkable, and Terrakion can run through all of your benched Eels and then start wearing down your Rayquaza, but it's still a fantastic deck. They are the only 2 I can wholeheartedly tell you are definitely worth playing this weekend, but there are some others to be aware of. Firstly, regular Eels, Zekrom Eels, or Raikou Eels. There's a lot of different things you can use. You can use Thunderous, bearing in mind how easily that one-hit KOs things like Tornadus and 2-hit KOs EXs. I think Thunderous has got a big place in Eels decks, especially if you can go first and get a turn 1 charge. And this is a very, very good deck, like I've said. It's not, I believe, as good as Ray Eels. I don't think it's as hard hitting, and it struggles more with Terrakion than Ray Eels does. Terrakion can really run through your entire deck. We've also got Terrakion-centered decks. Now this could be Terrakion Mewtwo, or Terrakion Stunfisk, or Terrakion Mewtwo Bouffalon, etc. But it's decks that revolve around both non-EX Terrakion, see my podcast last week for a lot of discussion on him, or EX Terrakion, bit more HP, hits just as hard, but also allows you to attach energy from your hand when you attack. Now, in theory, these decks are very, very, very well centered at the moment, because they're going to be taking out your Eels decks, and they're going to be taking out your Darkrai Hydreigon. However, it is far from a done deal. Darkrai Hydreigon, with things like Sigilyph, can take you down, can get the win there. Even if not, if they just run hot and get set up quickly, they really can overpower you. Especially if you go second and take a couple turns to get going in terms of energy attachments. Something like Darkrai Hammer's build, if they hit decent on Crushing Hammer, will completely rip you apart because you've got no energy acceleration until you've built up 3 on the field. Also, things like Ho-Oh can beat you, so in theory, it's good against the top 2 decks in the format. The problem is, it's not that good against anything that sets up really fast, and it's not that good against lesser played decks. Speaking of Ho-Oh, I was talking to my good friend Tommy Roberts last night, and I believe, based on his playing Ho-Oh and watching him play and having a good chat about the deck, I believe that Ho-Oh is the one deck other than Darkrai Hydreigon and Ray Eels that stands a decent chance at regionals this weekend. I would not be surprised to see a Ho-Oh deck taking down a regionals. And I've talked about this before. You get Ho-Oh in the discard, you use Rebirth, and then you're able to energy switch the energy from the Ho-Oh onto other attackers, and it works as energy acceleration. It's a very, very good deck, and it is so customizable to your local metagame. Now, obviously in regionals you don't have a local metagame. People are going to be coming for possibly hundreds of miles around, and there's going to be a good cross-section of everything. But all you need to do is pick the decks that you are least confident about facing, and just tech against them. Hammers is another deck which I think is worth running. My problem with Hammers is it doesn't have a brilliant matchup against Darkrai Hydreigon, and that's likely to be the most played deck of the weekend. It's also not brilliant against things like Ho-Oh that have energy acceleration. It is pretty good against Eels despite them having energy acceleration, because you can take out all of their electrics quite easily while spreading damage, and they're going to struggle to one-hit you. And it's an almost auto win, ironically, against decks that centre on Terrakion, because you can just hammer off all their energy, wait till they're out of energy, and then just start killing them. Now, I mentioned about Switch earlier. Now, as we're talking about Darkrai, I just want to make a very quick point here. If you are playing Darkrai, you should play Switch. Now, I know Darkrai's ability gives you free retreat, but that's not good enough, because nowadays people are using things like Stunfisk. It stops you retreating. So I can bring up your Darkrai with no energy on, and my Stunfisk with 2 energy can hit you for 80, and you can't retreat. If you don't play Switch, you can attach an energy, you can't Dark Patch it. If you're lucky, you might be able to energy switch. But if you can't, I'm going to hit you for another 80 next turn. All I need is a plus power and you're dead. Even if you've got an Eviolite and I don't have plus powers, 3 turns, that Darkrai's going down. Which means if I get the first hit on a Darkrai with no energy with my Stunfisk, you will die before you can attack, unless you can get some energy switch action going on. If nothing else, they can stall while they set up. They can maybe pull up a Darkrai or a Terrakion and keep it there while they build up enough energy that your crushing hammers aren't going to matter when you can get them back with Sableye, etc. I love playing against Darkrai decks that don't play Switch, because I'm quite a large Stunfisk fan. And the other deck which is potentially worth using is Darkrai Terrakion, which actually can be used with hammers as well. In theory, this is like Darkrai but with the added Terrakion to deal with your bad matchups and help you out in the mirror, etc. But Terrakion, even though Darkrai gives it free retreat, it's clunky as anything. It means you're running less basic Dark because you've got to run Fighting or Prism, and it means you're going to be a little bit slower and a little bit less consistent because you're not going to be Dark Patching as much or as early. I'm not such a huge fan of this deck, to be honest with you. Now, before I leave you for this week, I have and it's been a little while since we've had one of these, I have a very nice, most memorable game story from Kim McLean, so thank you, Kim, for sending that out. Now, I know Kim did also ask for advice on a deck, and I haven't sent that yet, and my apologies for not doing so. What I will do, it's about an Empoleon deck, so I'll just send you a copy of my list, and hopefully you can either try that out, see what you think, and playing those 2 lists should hopefully allow you to make a 3rd list of your own which you much prefer. So, the most memorable game. Kim was playing with an Eels deck against Mewtwo, Darkrai, Tornadus. This was a black and white on game, but there was no Dragons Exalted yet. So, you have a usual kind of start. Kim's got a Zekrom active and 2 Dynamos. Opponent's got a Darkrai and a Mewtwo. Needless to say, opponent gets a switch, catcher, DCE, Dynamo goes down. On Kim's turn, then have to Juniper 2 of the 4 catchers, which we know in this format is absolutely terrible, and basically get nothing. Play a couple more Dynamos down, and then obviously next turn another Dynamo goes, so there's another prize down. Already 3 prizes down, not getting any Eels out at the moment. Then Kim ends up with a hand 3 Juniper, 2N, and a catcher. Can't Juniper all of that stuff. So have to play the N, and needless to say, opponent gets a good hand. So you're probably getting the sense that this game, it's not going very well at all. The Kim loses another Dynamo and a Thunderous, must have super rodded him back at some point. Yes, she gets a super rod, and she's taken no prizes to her opponent's 5. She's got 1 prize left. Luckily, manages to get a fantastic hand off a supporter, manages to get 2 Eels out and a Zekrom, manages to take down the Mewtwo, then manages to 2-hit the Darkrai with Bolt Strike, grabs a Max Potion to heal that Zekrom, and then is able to take out the Tornadus in 1 hit with Bolt Strike, after ending the opponent, as I said, to a hand of, well, can't have been very much, shall we say. So I suppose it's one of those classic games where you have a horrendous start, but end. And well done to Kim for playing that end when the opponent had 1 card left to really give themselves the best chance of getting back in there. And one of those games where the end just gives you that little bit of breathing room to let your deck do what it was supposed to. It does always suck when you're playing against Eels and your opponent starts killing all of those Dynamos so quickly, but I suppose it can't be helped. Now, I'm not going to a regionals this weekend because I'm not American. I have hopefully got a couple of battle roads to go to. I'm still trying to decide what to do on Saturday, but on Sunday I will be going down to Horsham Battle Roads. So if any of you are going down there, come say hello. Next weekend as well, I'm off to both Sheffield and Aldershot, so lots of battle road fun for me in the very near future. I did quite well in my first 3, so hopefully I can keep that streak going, get a few more championship points. As always, please get in touch with me in the usual ways. You can find me on Twitter at TheWassy. Come follow me, send me a message. You can email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, or you can just leave a comment in Pokemon Dan's YouTube channel as always. Thank you very much for listening. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.
Well, thank you for that, Ross. It was both informative and stimulating.